That slip belongs to the association now, Mr. Hale. And frankly, it always should have. We've awarded it to someone who actually contributes here." Those were the words Diane Markham said to me across the Marina office counter on a Tuesday morning in April. Holding a sheet of paper she called an auction result, like it was a court order. Diane was the president of the Cedar Hollow Lake Association. 3 years into a presidency, she ran like a small kingdom. And the slip she had just announced she was taking was slip number 11. The slip my wife and I had held for 19 years. The slip where Ruth had taught our daughter to tie a cleat hitch the summer before she got sick. The someone who actually contributed, it turned out, was Glenn Pruitt, the association's treasurer, who had bid against no one in a sealed auction nobody else was told about. What Diane did not know, standing there with her clipboard and her pressed magenta blazer and her sunglasses pushed up into a tight blonde bob, was that the water her precious Marina floated on did not belong to the association at all. It belonged to me. The lake was a reservoir, and the dam that held it, and the gate that controlled it, sat on a 40-foot strip of my deeded land, recorded in the county a long time before Cedar Hollow existed, and I held the water right that let the lake exist in the first place. She had spent 3 years policing a pond she did not own the bottom of. So, let me ask you something before I tell you the rest of it. If someone handed you a piece of paper that said they had sold a thing you owned to their own friend and told you to your face that you did not contribute, what would you have done? I want you to hold your answer because mine took 11 months and it was quieter than you think. My name is Walt Hale. I was 61 years old that spring, and for 34 years before I retired, I worked as a water resources engineer for the state, which is a long title for a man who spent his life measuring how much water was where, how fast it moved, and who was allowed to keep it. I designed spillways, I inspected dams, I wrote the kind of reports that decided whether a reservoir got to stay full or had to be drawn down. And I learned early that water does not care about your feelings. Water obeys the deed and the elevation and nothing else. My place sits on the north shoulder of Cedar Hollow Lake. 11 acres of mixed pine and hardwood running down to the water, with the old earthen dam at the bottom of my property where the creek used to be. My great-uncle bought that land in 1941, before there was a lake, when the creek was just a creek, and the bottomland flooded every spring. He was the one who built the first low dam, by hand and by mule, to make a stock pond. When the county and a developer came through the 1960s wanting to raise the dam and flood the whole hollow into a recreational lake, my great-uncle did not sell. He granted them an easement to raise and maintain the dam, and in exchange the family kept the dam structure itself, the 40-foot strip it sat on, and the original water right that predated all of it. Every other lot around that lake is a lakefront lot that owns to the waterline and not 1 inch past it. My family owns the plug. Ruth and I built our house there in 1991, 2 summers of weekends and 1 contractor we trusted, and we did the dock ourselves with treated lumber and a borrowed pile driver, and more arguments about cleat spacing than I will admit to. We raised our daughter Casey on that shore. She learned to swim off the end of that dock with a ski belt and a rope around her waist. And she learned to read the lake the way lake kids do, where the wind sits, where the cold spots are, which cove holds bass in August. Ruth passed 4 years before any of this started. Cancer. Fast. The kind that does not give you the seasons you assumed you had. After that, it was just Casey and me, and the house got quiet. In a way, a house does when it was built for 3. And the slip and the boat and the water became the place we still felt like a family instead of 2 people rattling around a kitchen. Casey was 16 that April, old enough to drive the boat and old enough to be furious on my behalf. And she had her mother's habit of going very still and very precise when she was angry, which is a more dangerous thing than shouting, and I have always been grateful she got it from Ruth. The slip was where we kept Ruth's old runabout, a 19-foot bowrider with a tan interior. Ruth refused to let me reupholster because she liked the way it had faded, the one she never let me sell, and the only thing I ever asked of the association in 19 years was that they leave that slip alone. I am a man who keeps records. I want to be honest about that up front, because it is the whole spine of this story. When I worked for the state, an after-action file was not optional. If a gate failed or a landowner complained, or a reading came back wrong, you documented it the same day, in ink, with the date and the time and the names. Because 2 years later, in a hearing room, that file was the only thing that told the truth while everyone else told the version that suited them. I watched careers end over a missing log entry, and I watched a county lose a lawsuit. It should have won because nobody wrote down a phone call. So I never stopped. I have a gray 2-drawer cabinet in my home office, and a stack of labeled manila folders, and a yellow legal pad I keep on the corner of the desk for the first rough note before it goes in the folder clean. The day Diane handed me that auction sheet, I drove home, sat down at that desk, pulled a fresh folder, and wrote the date across the tab in block letters. April 14th, or I clipped the auction sheet inside it, and underneath I wrote 3 lines: what she said, where she said it, and who was standing there. And then I made a photocopy and put the copy in a second folder in the bottom drawer, because 1 copy is a note, and 2 copies is a record. I did not raise my voice in that office. I took the paper, I said thank you, and I left. That was the first thing I filed, and filing it was the closest thing to relief I felt that whole day, because a thing written down is a thing that has stopped being able to change its story. Here is how it started, because it did not start with the slip. It started 2 years earlier, the first summer Diane Markham was president, when she sent a letter to every homeowner announcing what she called a community standards initiative. The letter said the association would be conducting compliance walkthroughs of all waterfront features to ensure aesthetic harmony. I remember reading that phrase, aesthetic harmony, standing at my mailbox, and thinking it was the kind of language people use when they want something and have not yet decided how to take it. The first walkthrough happened on a Saturday in June of that year. I was on the dock with a coffee and a wrench, tightening a rail bracket that did not need tightening, the way you do on a good morning, when I heard the golf cart wind down my gravel drive. Diane came down driving it herself, with Glenn Pruitt riding beside her. Both of them in association polos the color of a swimming pool. And she had a clipboard and a camera, and a younger man in a windbreaker. The windbreaker had no agency name on it. I noticed that the way I notice a gauge reading that does not match the others. Diane stepped off the cart in white canvas sneakers onto my muddy bank and looked at the lake like she was appraising a room she intended to redecorate. She told me my dock railing was out of compliance with the new uniform standard, and she had Glenn photograph it while she talked. And then she gestured down at the dam at the bottom of my property, the earthen slope and the gray concrete tower, and she said the earthworks would need to be assessed for liability. I asked her who the inspector was inspecting for. She smiled the smile she used on everyone, the one that did not reach her eyes behind the pushed-up sunglasses, and she said the association took safety very seriously. I asked the young man what firm he was with, and he looked at Diane before he answered, which told me everything. I wrote it all down that night, the date, the names, the windbreaker with no logo, the way the inspector looked at Diane before he spoke. Folder 1, Incident 1, I should tell you about the dam because the dam is everything. An earthen dam is not a wall. People picture a wall, a slab of concrete, holding back a wall of water. And that is not what most of these lakes are. It is a managed slope of compacted clay and fill, a long, low hill you would walk over without knowing, with a control structure built through it, and at Cedar Hollow that control structure is a vertical concrete tower with a sluice gate at the bottom, what we call a low-level outlet, and a spillway notched into the rock abutment for high water. The gate is how you lower the lake. You fit a crank to a threaded stem, and you turn it, and the gate lifts, and the lake drains through the old creek channel downstream until you crank it shut again. There is nothing magic about it. It is a screw, and a plate, and a pipe. And it has been the same simple machine since my great-uncle's day. That gate sits inside the 40-foot strip my family owns, behind a steel door, behind a lock that has been mine since before I was born. Nobody at Cedar Hollow had thought about that gate in 40 years. The lake was just always there, like weather, like the road, like the sun coming up. They had bought lakefront lots and paid lakefront prices and never once asked the question a water engineer asks first, which is who controls the elevation, who owns the off switch, because the answer had always been a quiet man up the North Shore who kept it greased and kept it shut and never made them think about it. They had forgotten somebody had to own the off switch. I had not forgotten. I had spent my whole career being the person who remembers. The fine started that fall. The first notice was for the dock railing, $200 with a photograph attached. I had the railing inspected by a licensed marine contractor, wrote that it exceeded code, and I filed his letter with the notice and paid nothing because you cannot be fined into compliance with a rule you already exceed. The second notice came in November, $400 for what Diane called unauthorized structures on common area, meaning my dam. I wrote back one sentence. The dam is not common area, it is recorded private property, see deed. I attached the deed book and page. She did not answer. She sent a third notice in January, $800, and a fourth in March, and by then I had a tab in the folder just for fines, and the running total at the bottom of the page, written in my hand, was $1,400 assessed, $0 collected. That spring is when Casey started filming. She was 15 then, and she had figured out, before I had, that the camera was a kind of folder too. The first time Diane came down our drive uninvited, Casey stood on the porch with her phone and recorded the whole thing. And afterward she came inside and said, "Dad, you should put these somewhere they can't get erased." We set up 2 old hard drives and a routine. Every confrontation, every notice, every walkthrough, copied to both drives the same night. My daughter, 15 years old, taught me a redundancy protocol I should have already had. I have never been prouder of anyone. The escalation widened the way these things always widen, from me to the people around me. In the spring of the second year, Diane started in on the slip directly. She sent a letter saying the Marina was being reorganized under a new equitable access policy, and that historic slip assignments would be reviewed. I knew what that meant. I had held slip 11 for 19 years under a written assignment Ruth and I signed when the Marina was built. And there was nothing equitable about reviewing it, except that Diane wanted it gone. I filed the letter. I drove to the county and pulled my own deed and the Marina's original plat and the recorded easement, 3 certified copies of each, and I put them in the folder. And I waited. Folder 2 by then. I want to be fair to the people who were just doing their jobs, because this story does not work if I turn them into villains. That April, after the auction sheet, I called the county sheriff's office and a deputy named Sam Ortiz came out. Sam was maybe 40. Careful, the kind of man who reads a thing twice before he speaks. He looked at the auction sheet and the deed, and he said something I have repeated to a lot of people since. He said, "Mr. Hale, I can't arrest somebody for handing you a piece of paper. A property dispute is civil, but if they touch your boat, or they cut a lock, or they put their hands on something that's deeded to you, that's different, and you call me." He told me to keep documenting. He said, "The more of a pattern you've got, the easier my job gets." He named a number. He said, "You bring me 3 or 4 clear incidents where they crossed onto recorded private property, and I can do something with that." He pivoted the moment I showed him the deed. He was never the problem. The auction was the hinge. Diane had run a sealed auction for slip 11 without notice, and the only bid was from Glenn Pruitt, the treasurer, who paid the association $4,000 for the right to a slip. The association did not own to sell. I learned later, the way you learn these things, in pieces, that the $4,000 was a fiction too, a number on a ledger that moved from one association account to another and back, with Glenn on both sides of it. But I am getting ahead. In April, all I knew was that Glenn Pruitt was now telling people at the boat ramp that slip 11 was his, and that Diane had backed him in writing. On a Thursday morning in May, I came down to the Marina and found Ruth's runabout gone from slip 11 and a chain across the slip with a laminated sign zip-tied to it. The water was flat and bright, and there was a heron standing on the next dock, like nothing had happened. The boat had been moved to the gravel overflow lot at the top of the hill and left in the sun with the cover half off, one corner of the tan upholstery already going pale where the canvas had pulled loose, and Glenn's wide green pontoon was sitting in slip 11 where the runabout should have been, fenders squeaking against my dock. I stood there for a minute and felt my heartbeat in my ears and made myself breathe, the way you make yourself breathe before you climb down into a dewatered outlet pipe, slow, on purpose, because panic is how people get hurt. I did not yell. I walked the slip and I photographed everything. 11 photographs, time-stamped. The chain, the sign, the empty slip, the pontoon, the boat in the gravel, the scuffed corner of upholstery. I called Sam Ortiz and left a message, and then I called the Marina manager, a tired, heavy-set man named Rick, who I think had been afraid of Diane since the day she was elected, and I asked Rick one question. I asked who authorized moving a vessel off a deeded slip without the owner present. There was a long pause on the line, and I could hear him breathing, and then he said he would have to check with the board, which was Rick's way of saying Diane, and he hung up before I could ask anything else. He would not answer me. I filed it that night. The photographs to both drives, the call log, Rick's non-answer written out word for word. Incident. The boat. That one I underlined twice. That same week, the real motive surfaced, and it surfaced the way the profile of these things always does sideways, through a person who was tired of carrying it. Diane's husband was a man named Kurt Markham, and Kurt was a developer. I had known that in the abstract, the way you know your neighbor's jobs, but I had not known what he was building until a woman named Lorna, who sold real estate in town and had once sold a cabin to Ruth and me, stopped me at the hardware store. Lorna said, "Walt, do you know what Kurt Markham filed with the planning office?" She said it low, the way you pass along, a thing you are not sure you are supposed to know, with her cart half blocking the nail aisle. He had filed preliminary plans for a 40-unit lakefront resort and marina expansion on the South Shore. contingent on the association controlling the entire waterfront, including the slips, including the access, including, though it was not spelled out anywhere in the glossy pages, the dam and the water level that made the whole thing possible. The slip was not about the slip. The slip was about consolidating control of the shoreline so a 40-unit development could be marketed as having private deeded water access. Diane was not policing a pond. She was assembling a product. I went home and started a new tab and labeled it Motive, and I wrote down everything Lorna had told me, and the date she told me. And I added a note to verify it at the planning office, which I did that Friday, and it was all true. It was a matter of public record. They had filed it themselves. Here is what I understood that Friday afternoon, sitting in my truck in the planning office parking lot, with the photocopies on the passenger seat. The whole scheme depended on the lake being full and stable and theirs. A resort needs a lake at a marketable elevation, a number on a chart, a line on a shoreline that holds where the renderings say it holds. The drawings Kurt had filed showed boats and floating docks, and a little crescent of imported sand they were calling a beach, families in the water, a clubhouse with a deck out over it. None of it works if the lake is not there, and the lake is only there because somebody keeps the gate shut, and the gate is mine, and the water right is mine, and the easement that lets them keep the dam at all comes with conditions written in 1963. I had read it. I had read it so many times. The original was soft at the folds, and I kept a fresh certified copy behind it. The easement required the association to maintain the dam, to state safety standards, and to indemnify the landowner against liability. And it reserved to the landowner, to my family, the right to operate the low-level outlet for maintenance and for protection of the structure. In plain words, I was legally entitled to draw the lake down, and the state, my old employer, required that a dam of that hazard class be drawn down periodically for inspection of the outlet works, an inspection that was, by my own records, 4 years overdue. Diane had been so busy assessing my dock railing for liability that nobody on her board had filed the one inspection the law actually demanded. The structure she called common area, and then earthworks, and then a strip of mud, was sitting 4 years past, a mandatory safety inspection, and the only person within 100 miles licensed by experience to know that and authorized by deed to do something about it was the man she had just told. I want to be clear about something, because it matters to me and it should matter to you. I did not decide that Friday to drain the lake out of spite. A man who keeps records does not get to lie to himself in the records. What I decided was that I would stop subsidizing their certainty. For years, I had quietly kept the dam in good order, kept the gate greased, kept the lake where they wanted it, and never sent a bill or asked a thing, and they had mistaken my maintenance for their ownership. I decided I would do exactly what the law and the easement and the state inspection schedule required of me, no more and no less on the timeline that suited the structure, and I would document every step, and I would let the consequences fall where the paperwork said they would fall. The staircase still had 2 more steps to climb, because Diane was not finished, and the second step is the one that still tightens my jaw. In June, Glenn Pruitt hired a contractor to put up a gate across the Marina access road, the road that ran along the easement, and the contractor showed up with a bolt cutter and cut the lock off my equipment shed by mistake, or what they called by mistake the shed that sits on my 40-foot strip and holds the gate crank and the inspection ladder. Casey was home. She was 16 by then, and she watched 2 men she did not know cut a lock off our shed from her bedroom window, and she did the right thing. She locked the doors. She called me, and she called Sam Ortiz, and she filmed it. When I got the call, I was 20 minutes out, and I will tell you the truth, those were the longest 20 minutes of my life. Longer than the drive to the hospital the day Ruth collapsed, because this time it was my child alone, and I could not make the truck go faster. Her voice on the phone was not tidy. She said, "Dad, there's two guys. They cut the lock. I don't." "Should I open the door?" I said. "No." I said, "Stay inside. Keep filming. Sam's coming." I said it twice. I drove. Sam got there before I did. By the time I came up the drive, there was a sheriff's truck parked sideways across the road, and the two contractors were sitting on their tailgate, looking like men who had just learned the difference between a fence dispute and a trespass onto deeded land with a cut lock. The bolt cutters were on the ground, where Sam had told them to set them. Casey was on the porch with her phone still up, recording, her jaw set in that still, precise way. And when she saw my truck, she did not run to me. She just turned the camera to show me the shed door hanging open and the cut padlock in the dirt. Because she knew by then. It did come after. Sam had my folder. Logic by then, the deed, the strip, the recorded line. Because I had walked him through it in April, and he had remembered. He told the contractors they had cut a lock on private property recorded to me, and that the gate they were building sat partly on my easement strip and would have to come down. He was polite. He was neutral. He was also completely immovable, because the document said what it said, and a deputy who has read the document does not have to argue. One of the contractors said Glenn Pruitt had told them the whole road was association property. Sam said that was a conversation for Glenn and a judge, and that today they were going to load their tools and leave. That was incident, the shed, and the count of clear trespass incidents Sam had asked for in April went from 1 to 3 in a single morning. Because cutting the lock, entering the recorded strip, and erecting a structure on it were 3 separate things. I filed all 3. Casey copied the video to both drives that night, without being asked. She labeled the folder herself. She wrote, "Shed, June," and the date in her own handwriting. And seeing my daughter's handwriting on a folder tab in my cabinet did something to me. I am not going to try to put into words. That was the summer the Marina map of the lake started to feel less like a neighborhood and more like a board with 2 players, and one of them did not know how many pieces the other one had. Diane held 3 voiced positions that I documented in 3 different settings, and I want to give them to you the way they happened, because she said them out loud, on camera, more than once. At the first walkthrough, she said the dam was the association's earthworks. At the July Association meeting, which I attended and recorded with the posted recording aloud, she stood at the front of the clubhouse and said, "The Hale parcel is functionally part of our community waterfront, and we will be managing it accordingly." Functionally part of our community waterfront. I wrote that down twice, and in August, the week before the thing that ended it, she said to my face at the Marina, "You do not get to hold this entire lake hostage over a strip of mud, Walt." A strip of mud. The control structure of a regulated dam, the thing her husband's entire 40-unit resort depended on, and she called it a strip of mud, and she did not know, she truly did not know, that she had just described the exact thing she was about to lose. I had filed for the drawdown in July. Quietly, properly, the way you do. I notified the State Dam Safety Office that as the owner of the outlet works, I intended to perform the overdue inspection drawdown, and I requested their inspector be present, which is standard. I notified the association in writing by certified mail, 90 days as a courtesy, though the easement required only 30, that the lake would be lowered for a state-required inspection of the low-level outlet beginning after Labor Day, and that the drawdown would take approximately 3 weeks. I sent a copy to the Marina manager. I sent a copy to the county. Diane's office signed for the certified letter on July 29th. I have the green card. She did not read it, or she read it and did not understand it, or she understood it and assumed I would never dare. I will never know which. I filed the green card with the letter, and I waited for September, the way you wait out a long forecast. Knowing what is coming and unable to make anyone else look at the sky. You might think the reveal was loud. It was the quietest morning of my life. On the Tuesday after Labor Day, the state dam safety inspector, a woman named Priya Anand, who I had worked alongside 20 years before, met me at the dam at 7 in the morning. The fog was still sitting on the water, and the air smelled like cold pine and wet clay. The state had confirmed the inspection in writing. A letter with a seal that I had a copy of in the folder under my arm. Priya had her clipboard and her camera and her authority, real authority, the kind that comes from a regulatory agency and not from a clubhouse. And she had the agency file showing the inspection was 4 years overdue and legally required. We talked for a minute about her kids, and my Casey, the way old colleagues do before serious work, and then we got down to it. We unlocked the shed, my lock that the contractors had cut, and I had replaced with a heavier one, my crank, my inspection ladder, and Priya signed the log, and at 7:40 in the morning, with the state inspector documenting every turn, I fitted the crank to the stem. The stem was stiff for the first quarter turn, and then it gave, the way old iron does when it remembers its job. The sound it made was not dramatic. It was a low, steady rush down inside the concrete, felt in the soles of your boots, more than heard, the sound of a lake, remembering it used to be a creek. Casey was there. She filmed it, and she also just watched, because some things you film and some things you stand still for, and she did both. The water in the channel below the dam came up brown with 4 years of bottom silt, and then ran clear, and the lake, 11 feet of it, began, very slowly, the way these things always go, to leave. Diane arrived at 9. Somebody had called her. She came down the easement road in the golf cart with Glenn Pruitt beside her, and she was already shouting before the cart stopped, and what she shouted was, "You cannot do this. This is our lake." And then she saw Priya. She saw the state seal on the clipboard, and the agency jacket in the official log, and I watched the thing happen in her face that I had waited 11 months to see, which was not fear exactly, but the precise moment a person realizes the floor they have been stamping their foot on is not theirs. Priya did not raise her voice. Priya never does. She introduced herself, stated the agency, and said the words that ended it. She said, "This is a state-mandated inspection drawdown of a regulated dam, conducted by the deeded owner of the outlet works under a recorded easement, and the association is required to maintain this structure to the standards in that easement." She turned one page. She said, "When was your last engineering inspection? Because I don't have a filing from the association in 4 years. And that is a violation regardless of anything else happening here this morning." Diane did not have an answer. She had a clipboard. She held it the way she always held it, but it had stopped working, because the woman across from her was holding the same kind of object, backed by something real. Glenn Pruitt said the only smart thing he said all year. He said, "Diane, I think we should call Kurt." And that was the moment I knew it was over, because the name he reached for was not a lawyer's. It was the developer's. They had finally, in front of a state inspector, on my daughter's camera, admitted whose project this had always been. Here are the 2 numbers I want you to hold against each other, because they are the whole story. In 19 months of notices, Diane Markham had assessed me $3,100 in fines and collected 0. In the 48 hours after that gate opened, with the lake dropping toward an elevation where his renderings did not work and his contingent financing did not close. Kurt Markham's 40-unit lakefront resort lost its private water access. Its preliminary plat was pulled for revision. $0 collected from me. A development that existed only on paper. Gone. The strip of mud held the whole lake. It always had. The drawdown ran its 3 weeks. The inspection found exactly what an overdue inspection finds: an outlet that needed its seals and trash rack replaced, and an association that had not maintained a regulated structure to standard for years. And Priya's report went into the state file and a certified copy went into mine. And the violation for failure to inspect and maintain went to the association, which is to say it went to its officers, which is to say it went to its president and its treasurer by name. The repairs which the easement made the association's responsibility came to a number I will not pretend I did not enjoy reading, somewhere north of $60,000, billed to the same association that had tried to collect $3,000 from me and got nothing. The county was already curious about the auction by then, because once a state agency writes the words "failure to maintain" on official letterhead, and a real estate filing in the same office shows a husband's contingent resort built on that exact lake, people in county buildings start pulling threads on their lunch breaks. The auction of Slip 11, the $4,000 that had moved in a tidy circle with Glenn Pruitt signing on both sides of it. The plain self-dealing of a board, awarding an association asset to a sitting officer with no public notice. But because the documents were sitting in the public record the whole time, waiting for someone to be motivated enough to read them in order, an estate violation with an officer's name on it is very motivating. I did not have to say a word at the association meeting where Diane resigned. I was there. Casey was beside me. I had the folders in my lap, and I never opened them, because by then the documents had done their own talking. Diane resigned the presidency. Glenn Pruitt resigned as treasurer, and the county attorney's office opened a review of the slip auction. The new board, which was mostly the same tired neighbors who had been afraid of Diane, voted to restore Slip 11 to me with a written apology, and they voted to formally acknowledge in the association records the boundary that had been recorded in the county since before any of them were born. Ruth's runabout went back in Slip 11 the first week of October. Casey and I put it there ourselves on a clear, cold morning, and she tied the cleat hitched the way her mother had taught her, and neither of us said anything for a while, and that was enough. The lake came back up over the winter, the way reservoirs do, and by spring it was full again and stable, and theirs to enjoy, because I never wanted the lake gone. I only wanted them to understand that it was a thing that had to be owned and maintained and respected, and not a thing you could auction to your friends. The slip is just a slip again. The dam is just the dam. The gate is greased and locked. And mine. And Casey, who is 17 now and applying to study civil engineering, asked me last month if she could keep the folders. When I am gone, the gray cabinet and all of it. And I told her she could, and that she should add to them because the records do not protect you once. They protect you over and over quietly, for years, in rooms you are not in. So here is the lesson, plainly, because I promised you one, and a man keeps his promises. If you own something, find the paper that proves it and read the paper yourself, all of it, the easement and the conditions and the dates, because the people who want to take it from you are counting on the fact that you never have. Walk your boundary. Pull your own deed. At the county. It costs almost nothing. And keep a certified copy. When someone overreaches, do not argue with them. Document them. The same day, in ink, with the date and the time, and copy it somewhere it cannot be erased. Keep the receipts of your own good faith, the maintenance you did, the bills you paid, the corrections you offered, because your patience is evidence too. And know where the off switch is on the thing everyone around you takes for granted, because sometimes the smallest strip of land is the most important piece on the board, and the person who has quietly maintained it for years is not the one you want to underestimate. If you have a story like this, a fence, a deed, a board that forgot who owned what, put it in the comments, because I read them. And so do a lot of people who are in the middle of their own version right now and need to know it can come out right. Subscribe if you want to hear the next one. And next time I will tell you about the rancher Two Valleys over whose HOA tried to pave a road across a stock easement his grandfather recorded in 1938, and what the county engineer found when he finally pulled the original survey. Take care of your records. They will take care of you.